please tell us about your career and what you do for a living?
I am the curator of Griffith Observatory, which means I have responsibility for all of the educational and astronomical programs that happen here. So all of our telescope programs, our public programs, our educational programs, school programs, all of the interpretation on the gallery floor. If it has to do with astronomy and sharing astronomy with the public, then that's under me.
And typically, how many people come to the Griffith Observatory every day?
Griffith Observatory has about 1.5 million visitors a year. And there are some, summer, forget about it. It's crazy busy. Thanksgiving, Christmas, spring break, very, very busy. The low times, which are good times to come because you can get a parking spot, are like October. So that's a little bit low. But on our high days, we have as many as about 5,000 people a day.
Wow. And when you were younger, what did you want to do when you grew up?
I knew from the time I was a kid, as early as I can remember, that I wanted to be an astronomer. I just loved astronomy, and I had this automatic reaction every time I stepped outside at night of just immediately wanting to look up and see what was out there. And so I was just curious about that from my youngest years. My brother helped nurture that. Everyone in my family knew that about me, but my brother in particular took me down to the Adler Planetarium in Chicago. I grew up outside of Chicago every month to see the new planetarium show. And so that also had a big influence on me.
And in high school, what clubs or activities or sports did you participate in?
When I was in high school, aside from normal classes, I did a lot of music and theater. I had a wonderful group of friends. Most of them I'm still very close friends with today. And we, were the people who did the musicals, and there were music singing groups, a cappella singing groups. And I did that all the time. I mean, I was out every night with my friends doing music, so it was really fun. Also, in high school, during the summer, I spent a lot of time in Wyoming, in the wilderness. And I did a lot of backpacking and horse riding and canoeing and just wilderness activities. And that had a huge influence on me because in Chicago I couldn't see the stars, but in Wyoming the skies were absolutely breathtaking.
Did any of these help prepare you for your future in astronomy?
I think everything I did helped prepare me for the person I am, and then that shapes how my career unfolds. My time spent in the wilderness gave me a deep love for just simply the beauty of astronomy, and that plays plays out now when I create planetarium shows, and I have responsibility for the design and art direction of it as the director of those shows. So it's not just all science, there's a strong aesthetic component too, so that's a big part of who I am and how that came around. I think in terms of the music, again with the planetarium shows, my favorite thing is scoring the planetarium shows, and I do all the sound design and music editing, and so that was fun. But also, again, just the development of an aesthetic and of being a sort of a whole person who gets to indulge in the things I love. That makes me happy, and that helps because I think the key to being happy in this kind of a field is to have a kind of a round experience, do things that aren't just always doing math and science, but hiking and backpacking, music. Those are huge parts of me, and so they influence who I am and what I do today.
Did you ever experience any put-downs in high school? And did you ever feel like other people stood in your way of success in high school or had limiting views of your potential?
I can't really think of anything that was discouraging to me in high school. I had great friends. I had wonderful teachers. I had a lot of support, and I think I thought I was kind of invincible. So, it was great. It wasn't until I got into college, and then especially grad school, that I started to encounter barriers.
And can you tell us about one of those barriers?
In college, when I started out as a freshman in physics, there were, maybe 50 wannabe physics majors. I went to Yale as an undergraduate, and of the 50 starting out in physics, I was one of 2 women. And, that was tough because all the labs, I mean, it's a cliche, but absolutely true. The guys are doing it and we're just kind of quietly standing by. You can't get your hands in on the equipment without being aggressive, and we weren't socialized to be aggressive, especially this is in the 70s. I come from a generation where women had certain ways they were supposed to behave, and elbowing people out and telling them to get out of the way because here I come was not part of it. So just a lack of being able to get involved. But I remember distinctly hearing how a bunch of the guys went out for beers with the physics professor. This was the age when 18 was old enough to drink, and I was appalled. I could no more go out for a beer with my professor. First of all, he was cute. He was very cute and dynamic, and I was shy, and going out socially with a professor seemed absolutely impossible. Yet somehow the guys knew that that was a thing, and they developed relationships, and I was completely on the outside of that. So in both of those cases, it was sort of what I didn't know and didn't do, as opposed to someone actively getting in my way. My senior year, I had a flat-out quid pro quo sexual harassment proposition. I had an A in my quantum mechanics class, and had not missed 1 point. I had a perfect score all term long in everything. And final exam came in. I went into the professor's office to ask him. I was a senior, my last exams ever, to ask him some questions about the final exam. And by this time I'd become less shy and thought I could actually go talk to a professor. And he told me that, why bother? You can't get anything above a B. I couldn't understand it. Why would that be the case? I had a perfect score. I mean, 50 out of 50 on the midterm, every homework 10 out of 10. I could not understand it. And I was so naive, I didn't quite get what he was getting at the time. But he did ask me that, if I wanted to discuss it with him, I could make a separate appointment at another time. And honestly, I was furious, just furious. Probably shouldn't confess this, but I just blew off the final. I never did the final. I thought, to heck with that. If I'm going to get a B, then why, I've got 3 more days of senior year. I'm going to have some fun. And he never pursued it, and I got my B, and that was that. But only much later did I realize, oh, that's what that was. So anyway, that was kind of an overt sexist experience.
And moving along, what is one piece of advice that you would like to tell girls or young adults who might have been in similar situations?
Basic advice, of course, is to know yourself, have confidence in yourself, and surround yourself with people you trust. A sort of second, also important, is to be really clear about what you're passionate about and don't let anything stop you. How that boils down in practical terms in today's environment is really tough, because I think we have seen, in light of sort of what's going on in our society today, that sexism is every bit as rampant as it was when I was in high school. The expectations and the way it manifested were different, because there was nothing wrong with having different expectations for women, or limiting thoughts or representations of women. That was how it was. Now, in some ways, it's a little more insidious. But I've been giving a lot of thought to this phrase that everyone says, the future is female. I'm sure you've seen it on t-shirts and stuff like that. And I have been trying to figure out whether I agree with that sentiment, or I think that is a non-productive sentiment, because then it just sets up the whole thing of, us versus them, and makes it a conflict and sets out an enemy. And so I find that, in my middle years of my career, I never thought about gender stuff. I was just charging ahead, and it helps to have blinders. There's a piece of advice: get some good blinders and just go forward. But at this point in my career, and at this time in history, I am finding myself a little discouraged and uncertain. about what the right tack is for women to take in terms of taking their place properly in the workforce. Corny as this is, just do the right thing, tell the truth, work hard. I think, you know, don't get drawn into the games, and luck is another part of it. You know, try to identify the people who have confidence in you and faith in you, male or female, and spend time with them. Try to just stay clear of the rest.
What obstacles did you face while pursuing your career?
My first professional job was at the Space Telescope Science Institute, which is the NASA science institute that supported the Hubble Space Telescope. There was one woman on the faculty, on the senior staff of, I guess about 12. And this is absurd because the institute was a new institute created for Hubble in the 80s, and there were plenty of women already. And yet when they started from scratch and created a whole new thing, it was once again all guys, one woman, quite senior, Israeli, actually wife of a well-known astronomer as well. Annetta Bakal was her name. And it was a kind of a shock. And that was horrible. I'm just going to say, it was a horrible sexist environment. And I don't even mind if somebody from that time and era sees this, because it was so renownedly horrible that there were many panels and review panels and something's got to be done. And a decade later, people came to talk to me because they talked to every woman that left to find out what was the problem. And everybody had the same thing to say. It was an old boys club. Classic. This happens all the time. I'm sure it's probably happened to you. You say something, no one responds. The guy next to you says the same thing, and everyone says, oh, that's a very interesting idea. We should consider that. That's happened to me more times than I can count. It happened to me 2 weeks ago. It's a thing. It happens all the time. And I wasn't until my mid to late 30s that somebody said, well, you should say, oh, I thought I just made that suggestion. Is there a difference? Or, you know, call it out. Or if nobody answers the first time, well, I just made a suggestion. What does everybody think about that? And for the first couple of years after, it's like, oh, I couldn't do that. You know, because if I meekly put forward a suggestion, no one answers, to then say, hey, I insist that you answer, is really felt so bold to me. Now it's easy for me to do. So that kind of practice helps. I nested that in there with your question about what obstacles did I have in my career, but you know, I was in a complete boys club. There was no changing it. I got out. Maybe that's another piece of advice. Know when to leave, know when you can't win, and go someplace else. Sad as that is.
Was it always easy to keep pursuing your passion for astronomy in a male-dominated profession?
You know, in some ways it was easy for me to keep pursuing my passion because my passion was so strong. I wanted to do astronomy. I loved astronomy. It was what felt natural to me. And so naivete helped a lot. Not really realizing that I was trying to do something that nobody, you know, that first of all was difficult, and especially difficult if you were female. I remember as a postdoc, I was in an office with 3 other postdocs, and I made some kind of comment. I think it might have been about an experience where I had offered an idea and no one had answered, and I brought that up, and one of the other male postdocs said to me, oh, come on, Laura, you know they don't take you seriously. I was like, what do you mean? He said, well, just look at you. You're blonde, you laugh a lot. Nobody takes you seriously. I was crushed. I had no idea that nobody took me seriously. And it was in an instant I went from being, you know, the nerd who in high school and college didn't have the dates and everything because I was a physics major, so I was too nerdy for the general population that I was part of. And then in an instant, I was too not nerd. I wasn't nerdy enough. They were not taken seriously because, you know, I'm blonde and female and laugh a lot. I couldn't believe it. Why shouldn't a person be able to be blonde and female and laugh a lot and still be taken seriously? And I don't think I ever quite got over that. You know, so what I did was go places where we have a lot of laughs at Griffith Observatory. Everybody laughs a lot at Griffith Observatory. And, you know, consequently, my days are lots of fun and I'm taken seriously. So a lot of it is just to navigate, to find your right place, because there are right places out there. Not everyone is the enemy, and some places just, you know, will never change.
Was there someone specific that helped you or believed in you along the way?
My high school choir teacher jumps to mind as someone who really believed in me along the way. And that's kind of odd because you'd think choir doesn't have a lot to do with astronomy, but she was such a leader to all of us and to my whole group. And, you know, we adored her. And honestly, and this will seem a little strange, but she did a lot of 20th century and postmodern music. I graduated from high school in 1976. So we did contemporary stuff written in the 60s and 70s that didn't have meter or had changing meter every measure, or, you know, very, very intellectually challenging things you can't imagine you would give to 17-year-olds and 16-year-olds, you know, just very, very sophisticated stuff. She always challenged us up here, and we would rise to the occasion. And I think having that kind of teacher at an early age who showed me what it was to reach beyond anything I even knew was in my grasp was really incredibly influential. In college, I had a professor who was a wonderful mentor. Her name was Beatrice Tinsley. She's an astronomer and quite a well-known female astronomer. There's actually a prize named after her in the American Astronomical Society. And she was my supervisor during my senior year thesis. So when I left college, or when I was just about to graduate, she asked me, did I want to go to grad school? She was wanting to know what was I going to apply, and I said, no thank you. I've had enough school. I hated school. Hated school. Assignments, deadlines, stress, pressure, value, you know, why would anyone go back to school? I'm going to go have fun in New York. And so she said, okay. And the following year she passed away of breast cancer, actually. And I was very sad, went back to New Haven, went to her memorial. The following year after that, I decided I wanted to go to grad school. So I went back up to New Haven, visited the faculty there, and one of them said, oh, Beatrice wrote a letter for you just in case you wanted to go back to grad school. So before she passed, she gave one of the other faculty members a letter of recommendation for me. And I was so moved by that. She was an invisible hand, a gentle hand. She taught me a lot, but it wasn't overt. I mean, it wasn't like it is today where professors and students are friends and plan things together. It was a guiding hand that I don't think I actually even understood was there until well after.
Was there someone who made it harder than it should have been?
The list. The entire male faculty of the University of Wisconsin. When I started out as a grad student, I was the only female in my class. I think there were 5 of us, maybe 7 of us actually. I take that back. There was one other woman, I think about her all the time, Naziha from Mosul, Iraq. I think about her every day as this whole assault in Mosul, and we just had this big explosion in Mosul that killed a lot of innocent people. And she was in this country to learn astronomy, go back to the university and teach. She was a Christian, and given that ISIS was requiring all Christians to renounce their faith or face death several years ago, I would be very surprised if she was alive because she was devout. Anyway, I just needed to correct myself when I said I was the only woman. Naziha was very quiet, kept to herself, came to class, went home, not part of the department and the whole environment. So I don't want to misspeak because I wasn't the only female. There were very few females. In my class, the 2 classes above me and the classes below me, we were you know, 1 out of 10. And during my first 2 years, all of the guys made friendships with the professors, and I continued to have teaching fellowships, and they moved over to research fellowships. And, you know, they were the golden boys. There were clearly the stars, and then there were other guys, and then there was me, you know, nice Laura. 2 years into grad school, you go through something called prelims or qualifying exams, and it's 2 days of exams, and if you don't pass, you don't get to go on for the PhD. Big nerve-wracking thing. Everybody, you know, very nervous about this. So exams came and went, and upon the completion of the exams, I was one of 2 who passed with honors. The other person who passed with honors was the one and only African American in the department, student, male, who was there not on any kind of fellowship. He worked at McDonald's. I kid you not, he worked at McDonald's to pay for grad school. So he went to class and went away, and we never saw him either. But he and I were the only 2 that passed with honors, and everybody else passed or failed. And my entire experience at grad school changed that day, because when it became known that not only did I pass, but I beat all the golden boys, my friendships were over. I was completely ostracized from the guys who had me, you know, around because I was fun and did stuff socially, but that was that. One guy never spoke to me again. He was the one who failed. My only friend in the department was the secretary, female, the only person. And Olivia, a senior woman who actually left the next year, she was getting her PhD the same year we went through qualifiers. So it was a pretty lonely experience, very, very lonely. During that time, I was I went observing for some data for my thesis with my supervisor, my thesis advisor, and another male astronomer, and we all went off to Green Bank, West Virginia, to a radio telescope there. After a few days, my supervisor left, and I stayed. It was the first time I had done radio astronomy, so I was learning things. I stayed with this other guy. That first day, the guy propositioned me to go to bed with him. I was so floored and like, ugh. And so for the remaining, I don't know, 5 days with all those observations, I just avoided him, just tried to not go near him. Right there is a disadvantage because, you know, everybody else is learning all about the correlators and the telescope and talking science and everything. I was back in my room, so I didn't have to put up with his advances. And I called my boyfriend back in the department. Oh my God, he just robbed it, you know, around the phone. So everybody in the department knew, all my friends knew, but I just, you know, whatever. Again, at that time, I was like, oh, it's so embarrassing to me, not like you so-and-so. That's completely wrong. It would never have occurred to me to go on the offensive on that. I was just humiliated and embarrassed and icked out, you know. A year after I got my PhD, I was in Baltimore at the observatory, at the Institute, Space Telescope Institute, and a female astronomer who had close ties with our department was visiting, and we were speaking, and somehow it came up, and she said, oh, everyone knew. I said, what? I mean, knew all my friends knew. All the faculty knew. My thesis advisor knew and did nothing. And I went off to the bathroom and sobbed. I don't know, I'd put up with all this for all these years. Something about learning that they knew and did nothing. That was like the final straw. I just cried and cried. And to this day, I don't give any money to the University of Wisconsin. I don't. I had a horrible experience there. I learned stuff. I got through, as Vera Rubin, first woman astronomer in the National Academy of Sciences, she just passed away about 2 months ago, said to us in a women's meeting at one point, you just muddle through. And that was her best advice. You asked me earlier, what's the best advice? I'll just echo what Vera said. You just muddle through. There is kind of no strategy. You just deal with all the stuff that comes your way and try to make your way through it. So, you know, I knew grad school was hard, but now when I look back at it, knowing what I know today, it was not only hard, it was wrong. I mean, it was wrong. And I was horrified to come to understand how little regard and what little support I had from the faculty. They are there to help you thrive, help you succeed. Last thing, every paper I wrote was single authored, or me as lead author. In science, it's very common to have, you know, Danley and Smith, Smith and Danley, Danley, Smith and Jones, Jones and Smith and Danley. Everybody collaborates in groups, and you get lots and lots of papers because you were named on everybody else's papers, and it's a group. Not for me. The guy ahead of me, the guy below me had my thesis advisor's name and their name in every possible combination. Tons of papers, the guy below me, tons of papers, the person ahead of me. For me, it was either Danley alone or Danley, and, you know, I was the lead author. So I mean, and you get ranked on how many papers you have. So this is explicit, damaging career stuff that, you know, maybe it was that I wasn't smart enough or good enough student, but, you know, I see you shaking your head. I think I'm smart enough. I think that was proved. You know, I got honors in my exam. Why was I treated that way? Well, I'm blonde and I laugh, you know, whatever. I don't know. It was, so yeah, overt. I didn't expect to sort of go into all these, but as we're talking, I keep remembering, and I'm sure there are another dozen stories that if we went talk longer, I would remember, oh yeah, and then that happened. So there have been a lot of obstacles that I have faced. I hope I never have to remember them all, because it's kind of making me mad right now to even think about it. But, you know, it's just the path I took. I hope it's easier today for young. I know it is easier in terms of more fellowship. There are women understand and have a voice now that they didn't when I was coming up through the ranks. I don't think the kind of situation that I just described to you would ever happen in a department today. Although we did just see, you know, very well-known astronomer fired from a department for continually harassing females, but they did fire him. So, you know, I hope it's a little better now.
Are there any quote-unquote glass ceilings that you broke during your very successful career as an astronomer?
I had a lot of firsts in my career, so I was certainly the first female, but I was also the first person to have just about every position I've ever had. I was the first project scientist for education at Space Telescope Science Institute. I was the first curator of space sciences and the first chair of the Department of Space Sciences at the Denver Museum of Natural History. I am the second curator here. The first curator was Ed Krupp, our current director, in the late 60s. And after he became director, just 2 years or so after he got here, there's been no curator in between. So I'm the first female curator, but I'm only the second curator. So I don't know that that in those positions there were glass ceilings, because it's not like there was this long tradition of this position that I had broke into. I was creating the position. I was hired into it, and then I made it up. By the way, advice: trust yourself on the make it up as you go along thing. There isn't a right way that somehow we have to, you know, fit into. You just use your good judgment and your sound mind and good heart and try to do your best, you know. So it was a little different in that way. I would have to think about, because I've had so few jobs that have been jobs at other people. I think I might have been on University of Denver, I might have been the first female faculty member in that department. I don't know if there were women before me. It was all men when I went into that department, and I was the only female. Whether there was someone, you know, 10, 15, 20 years earlier, I don't really know. The first thing I'd say to my 16-year-old self is, hi! It would be so fun to see her again. And the second thing I would say to her is, you are so cool. And you should know that, because I look back and boy, she was cool. At 16, that was right in my backpacking days, and you know, I was smart and fun and had friends. I mean, everything was great. It was a great time in my life, actually. And so and yet, of course, there's always doubt and all those things. So I would try to say, I know you feel doubt. There's nothing I can say to you that will make you not feel doubt. But in the dark times, please have faith, because it does get better. And there are dark times and there are not dark times. And when you're in hard times, it seems it's impossible to remember what it's like when it's not bad. But then when you're in good times, it's kind of hard to remember what it's like when things are tough. You know, we're so adaptable and we live within our experience so completely that you really have to both have faith that when you're struggling, things will get better, and be wise to the fact that when things are going well, you need to treasure it and try to sustain it, because things can come out of left field that you might not see. I think I could, if I wanted to give myself some constructive advice, I would want to encourage her to be a little less naive. I was brought up, my mother believed that innocence was a gift, and she wanted us all to stay as innocent and unaccustomed to the struggles of the world as we could. That didn't always serve me professionally. Maybe it did in terms of having blinders to things, but I would say something out of naivete that I would later see was, oh, that offended somebody. I think that's been something that's always come as a surprise to me. I never mean to offend anybody, but I think sometimes I've done things that have made people mad, assuming that everyone else at Space Telescope wanted to support the education program because it's good for America, was naive and bad for me because I didn't see the knives coming. So I would want to try to maybe help this younger self understand a little bit about what motivates other people, and that not everybody was raised the way I was raised, to sort of, share and live by the golden rule. And I have a very corny upbringing, and not everyone does. And I was a little surprised to discover that painfully, in its successive job situations. I'm absolutely a feminist. I think the idea that anyone would say that they're not a feminist when what they want is for women to have equal opportunity is absurd. I'm glad that trend is going away. It was a little irritating for those of us who are bloodied by breaking through glass barriers to then have, oh, I'm not a feminist. Are you kidding me? What we went through? You are a feminist. You'll discover it later.